Welcome to the Center Mid Philosopher. This episode is brought to you by Augustus Royale Fashion. Life's not black and white, it's gray, and gray is beautiful. Check out the brand below in the link. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's episode of the Center Mid Philosopher. Got a really cool mini-series we're launching called 101 Deadliest Derbies, 101 Dangerous Derbies, 101 Fiercest Derbies. And as you'll hear and watch, by no means are we celebrating some of the dark things amongst these derbies, if you will. However, as we talk about a lot in this show, it's part of the game, like it or not. And, again, we're not celebrating it by any means. It is just interesting. And it's really cool to go a little bit deeper on a lot of these derbies. And, when I first started researching for this, it was going to be top 10. And then I was like, oh, there's no way it's going to be top 20, or top 50. Then I was like, man, we're getting to top 80. And I was like, let's just go for the full 101. And, when I fell in love with the game, I think of many things that I was captivated by, one of the top was just the absolute bedlam that fans would induce and mass hysteria, and just seeing fandom on that scale I don't know how it wouldn't be captivated by it. And nothing quite induces mass hysteria like a good old-fashioned derby. And it's really fascinating too. As I told Zach when I was preparing this, I felt like I was studying for an AP history test, because as soon as you dig one layer deeper, you start getting into industrialization, geopolitical, class warfare, religion, politics, assassination attempts. I mean, it gets really deep and really intense and really complicated really, really fast. And I'm going to do my best, and just bear with me on some of the pronunciations of these names. I know I got a bit of a southern drawl, but I'm going to do my best. But you're going to hear things like the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Industrial Revolution, Colombian drug cartels, stabbings, things you couldn't even fathom, fan avalanches. I mean, just banana stuff. And so I really hope you guys enjoy it. And we're going to continue to visit this throughout the year, and there'll be 10 of them. So this is the first of the 10-part episode, 101 Deadliest Derbies. And again, I should mention, we're not really going in sequential order, because how do you measure what you start saying best? Well, it feels kind of weird saying best for some that are actually just extremely dangerous and hurtful and mean. So best didn't feel quite right. And then it was like most dangerous, and that didn't feel quite right. So we're actually kind of just going in a random order, and because it felt a little bit wrong to say, well, more people died in this derby, so we're putting them at number 7. That just doesn't feel right.
Hard to put a metric on it, for sure.
Yeah, and so again, we're not celebrating that. I mean, so throughout, the goal each episode is to pepper some of the ones that you are familiar with, along with ones that you've maybe never even heard of, from regions and countries that you didn't even know exist, and maybe learn some new things, and also learn a little bit deeper about, some of the teams that maybe you do follow, but learn a little bit more about how the rivalry came to be. So right off the top, we're going to start with Der Klassieker, Feyenoord versus Ajax, by far the biggest one in the Netherlands. And, at the core of this derby is, as will be the case of many of these derbies, is two cities that have very, very different identities, both economically as well as politically, culturally. So Rotterdam actually has the second biggest port in all of Europe, and Feyenoord origin is actually that of a lot of dock workers, and Rotterdam is a very hardworking industrial city, and they view themselves as hard workers and a little bit maybe more of the working class, whereas Ajax is viewed of that of intellectuals, artists, creative thinkers, a little bit more urban, if you will. And, of course, they're viewed as by far the most cocky of the two. And, I was watching some prep of a famous Ajax podcast, and he would say, the worst thing that about Rotterdam thinks of us is when they realize we don't think about them much at all. They're just very conceited. And, but, this rivalry is littered with homemade bombs, attack on players, sick chants, violence, lots of violence. One of Rotterdam actually has the highest percentages of non-foreigners in all of Holland. Nearly half of the population is not native to Holland. They're polarized politically, as I mentioned, kind of cultural, but, Amsterdam, as you would probably imagine, is much more liberal, maybe even socialist leaning, whereas Rotterdam is that much more of right wing, kind of native, and, there's a lot of phrases to encapsulate this, but they say, Amsterdam to party, Hague to live, Rotterdam to work. Or they say Amsterdam to dream, Rotterdam to work.
Kind of reminds me of like LA versus Detroit or something, like manufacturing versus creatives. I mean, not apples to apples, but
one that comes to mind is the Yankees Red Sox, or LA, the Celtics versus the Lakers, kind of the flash versus the grit of Boston, that would be a really good analogy. And so a couple crazy moments in the history of the Derby. In 2004, Feyenoord midfielder Jorge Acuna was hospitalized after Ajax hooligans attacked him at a reserve team match. Again, none of these are great things, but they're pretty wild and interesting. 1997, in a field motorway between Amsterdam and Rotterdam, two ultra firms organized a prearranged clash in a field. Literally, those described it as a scene from Braveheart, like running full speed to each other with knives, bats, poles. It became known as the Battle of Beverwyck. And in that rivalry, in that clash, a guy named Carlo Picorni, who was once a huge hooligan, kind of came out of retirement for this clash and was actually beaten to death in a muddy field. And then another Ajax follower ran to kind of save him, and he was stabbed twice in the lungs. So again, these are horrifying things. We're not celebrating it, but you may not have known that. Now, you might watch Ajax and Feyenoord a little bit differently now.
it wasn't even that long ago.
No.
97. It sounds like something that happened in the 20s.
Right. And then, of course, there's pouring gasoline on the rivalry was that Johan Cruyff, everyone thinks of as of Ajax, and he is, but many maybe don't realize he actually finished out his career with Feyenoord. He was a little bit pissed because he wanted to stay at Ajax, but they wouldn't re-sign him because he was getting into his mid to late 30s, and he ended up. And of course, the Feyenoord fans hated him. They booed him for a while. He ended up winning them over though because they won. He actually took him to the title, playing against the likes of Van Basten and Ruud Gullit and those kinds of folks. And so he ended up being a savior. But he's one that crossed enemy lines.
Playing into your mid to late 30s back then.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So that's Der Klassiker, Ajax versus Feyenoord. Jumping to number 2, it's FC Copenhagen versus Brøndby in Denmark. So Brøndby is the much, much more historic club that's been around for decades and decades, almost 100 years. Both Laudrup brothers played there, as did Peter Schmeichel. It's definitely the blue blood old school team, and they have a real hatred for FC Copenhagen because many people don't realize, but FC Copenhagen is actually a relatively new club. It's only been around for about 25, 30 years, and they hit the ground running. They came in and started winning titles, and so Brøndby very much views them as this kind of nouveau riche, cocky newcomer. And again, very similar to, you're going to see this in almost all these derbies, is that it's right back where we were with Feyenoord. Ajax is FC Copenhagen is that of the city center, intellectual, kind of successful hotshot businessmen and women, and then Brøndby is the suburbs, the people that work hard, are trying to preserve history of Denmark, whereas FC Copenhagen is much more progressive, and much more gentrified, and FC Copenhagen is, and so it's a really hot rivalry. The Athletic did a whole deep dive on it. It's a really, really cool one, and definitely encourage you viewers and listeners to watch that one. And of course now, especially FC Copenhagen, there's just constantly phenomenal players coming out of there. I mean, Rasmus Højlund and his brother, actually his little brother, still plays there. Actually, there's two twin younger brothers, and they're both sick. So anyway, a lot of great players come out of that rivalry, and a lot of fans have really looked to Denmark and the Danish league as kind of what Europe used to be like, and what maybe the EPL used to be like 30, 40 years ago. So check that one out. Going to throw an MLS one in here, number 3. Hell is Real, FC Cincy versus Columbus Crew. They just battled the other night, actually, in the MLS semifinals. A real thriller. Looks like FC Cincy had it, but Columbus Crew came roaring back, won 3-2. What's cool about that, there's not a lot to go into depth on this one, because, hey, look, MLS, we're brand new to all this, and these rivalries are just being forged. But maybe you'll learn about this. And interesting, a lot of these derbies is all about branding, just kind of branding it from the get-go. And the reason it's called Hell is Real is because there's this really long stretch of highway in between Columbus and Cincinnati of just kind of nothingness. And right at the absolute center is a sign that this farmer hung up, has had hung up for years, called, and it just says "Hell is Real," and it's a very, it's religious, and it's encouraging people to embrace Christianity. He by no means intended it to be used for an MLS derby, but it's really cool, and both sets of fans have really embraced that as the moniker of the derby. And again, it's brand spanking new, but it's a really cool one. And, watch that one as the years unfold. And, both have really rabid fan bases, and, have been really, really successful in the MLS. I mean, Columbus Crew is viewed as kind of one of the OGs, and FC Cincy has just done fantastic upon entering the league. So
Columbus is like one of those teams. When I think of the MLS, it's like one of the first ones that I think of. Kind of like your staple. Hopefully no stabbings recently. And that.
Yeah, I know. We're again, it's. I would just. I mean, we're gonna throw some MLS ones in here, and we're reminded of how young our league is. I mean, we're in its infancy. I mean, some of these derbies go back 100, 150 years. So who knows what will happen when the hell is real rivalry in the next 25, 50, 75 years. I mean, things can start out pretty benign, and, so it'd be hard to kind of really anticipate what's all going to happen. But watch that one, guys. Jump into number 4, the Ruhr Derby, the Riviera Derby. So Borussia Dortmund versus Schalke, German. It's called the mother of all derbies. It's in the industrial heartland of Germany, coal and steel. And, Gelsenkirchen and Dortmund, it's known as the Black and Yellows versus the Miners. Black and Yellows, of course, being Dortmund, and the Miners being Schalke. And this derby's been around for decades and decades, near 100 years now. It really intensified in the 1970s during some economic decline in the Ruhr region, and a lot of the workers in the coal and steel factories turned to soccer and football as an escape, and it took out a lot of their frustration in that. Interestingly on this one, there isn't as much of a cultural, philosophical, political, religious divide in this. It's more just the teams really are big rivals and really hate each other. And soccer hooliganism and the late 1970s really stepped up quite a bit, and the violent firms formed of the Gilsenszene of the Dortmund, and then that's Schalke, and then the fascist Dortmund firm of Borussia in 1982. One of the cool things, we talk about players that have kind of crossed the divide, if you will, or interesting moments. Some of the maddest moments was Jens Lehmann, the goalie. He played for both teams actually, and one of the wildest moments was in 1997. He scored a header, a late last-second equalizer, and for Schalke against Dortmund, and it was like the first of all time for a goalie to have ever scored in the Bundesliga. And then another player that crossed the divide was Andreas Moeller, became an instant villain on both sides when he crossed the divide to join Schalke from, of course, he's more associated with Dortmund in 2000. So that's a good one, Dortmund versus Schalke, the mother of all derbies.
Just some players that have played for both: Jens Lehmann, Stefan Freund, Andreas Moeller, and going a little farther back, Ingo Anderbrook. I hope I probably botched those, but you can see the players crossing that divide, playing for both teams.
Yeah. So that's a great one. And then, that we're going to touch on a lot of other derbies within Germany, but that's definitely viewed as one of the biggest ones. And a lot of viewers and listeners that, don't have intimate knowledge of the Bundesliga maybe don't pay quite as much attention to that one.
Even with the lack of form, Schalke is still one of the most popular German teams, at least when it comes to my mind anyway, thinking about the teams.
Yeah, and I mean, Schalke, they've had some great play. Klaas-Jan Huntelaar, our very own Weston McKennie, Raul did a little stint there. They haven't quite, they're not quite what you think a little bit more of Dortmund, but I think going 10, 15 years ago, you maybe heard a little bit more about Schalke even. So jumping to the next one, this one's a really good one. We're really getting into the wild stuff now here. It's known as the Grenal Derby, so it's Gremio versus International. We've talked about Gremio on this show before. Love Gremio. So that's in the southern part of Brazil, the Gaucho country, Rio Grande do Sul. And it is extremely, extremely polarizing. Gremio is the oldest club, founded in 1903 by largely German immigrants. And wouldn't you know it, the Italians didn't love that so much, so what'd they go up and do? They formed International. So right there, you're just right at the very beginning, you've got a cultural difference going back 120 years now. Inter has gathered some really great nicknames along the way. In the 1940s, they were known as the Rollo compressor, the steamroller, also known as the Factory of Aces, the champion of it all, which makes up what it makes up for in lack of humility with inclusion. So Inter is actually viewed as much more of an inclusive club of all different socioeconomic, and it's they champion that to this very day. Gremio, not as much. In fact, these are, we're not going to go into too much detail, but with some of even anti-LGBTQ and racism and some of that stuff, unfortunately, Gremio has been they've been maligned for some of that lately, and they've really come out and they've punished those fans, and they've owned up to it, and they're really trying to be better. But there are some undertones of Gremio and that going way back in the day.
It's amazing to me, and it's like one of those unexplainable things in sports, how especially in soccer. A club will kind of take an affinity to a politically associated. It's one of those like hard to explain yet, something that you see time and time and again. A trend of taking a political side, if you will.
Oh yeah, I mean, almost all these have that element to it, extremely pronounced. Gremio is known as some of the most intense in fans in Brazil, if not the most intense. And interesting, I was watching about their pre-match, like it's like tailgating, where they have like all these grills, like hundreds of them outside the stadium, and your family can rent a grill, and they all get out there for, it's sort of like tailgating SEC football and that kind of stuff. But they had to install metal barriers at the bottom of where the fans sit, because they had this thing known as the avalanche. When they would score, the fans would just stampede down to the bottom, and people were getting so severely injured. You see Boca Juniors does this quite a bit too, and it's, look up the avalanche, Gremio. It's really wild. One of the most famous moments in the Grenal Derby is when Ronaldinho was playing for Gremio, and he was this hot sensation teenager, and Dunga was playing for International, more in the latter part of his career, and Ronaldinho just humiliated him, like juked him so bad, and I think he was just having some fun. Well, wouldn't you know it, 11 years later, Dunga got his revenge, being named head coach of Brazil, and who did he not name to the World Cup squad? That'd be Ronaldinho. Interesting. Maybe you didn't know that one. This is going way, way back in some of the wild moments. In 1935, Gremio keeper Euricio Lara had a significant heart condition and was told not to play. He ended up going on to play in the Derby, saved a penalty kick taken by his very own brother, went on to die 2 months later from the excitement in that Derby. Pretty wild. And as for Inter, they love to recall 1989. They called it the Grenal of the century. They in front of 80,000 fans, trailing 1-0, down to 10 men in the 40-degree Celsius heat. They stormed back to a 2-1 win. Inter dominated, International dominated mostly in the 70s, and Gremio struggled in the 80s. It was the other way around. Gremio kind of went on to dominate. But that's a really, really cool one, and maybe one that you didn't know a lot about, but it's really passionate region of Brazil, as we've talked about in the past. International, actually really cool. I don't know if people are watching Johnny Cardosa, the U.S. international that is being tabbed to maybe start getting called up to the U.S. men's national team, and is getting viewed by some really European teams. He plays for International, actually, so that's really cool. Okay, number 6, really getting into it. This one, 442 magazine rates as the number 4 biggest rivalry in the world, which is Nacional versus Peñarol, right here, Carolina blue and the yellow and black. Montevideo, Central Uruguay. This is the oldest derby outside of England, and they've been playing for over a century. They have faced off over 500 times. These two clubs. Nacional play in Parque Central, built in 1900. It's the oldest stadium in South America. Peñarol play in Estadio de Centenario, which is actually where Uruguay won the first ever World Cup title, in that stadium. So 2 clubs and stadiums steeped in history. Peñarol was founded by British railway workers in 1891, and interestingly, the yellow and black jersey is because that's what were the cautionary signals for railway workers. Really interestingly, and Nacional was the first club set up not by expats, so it's a very we're Uruguayan origins. So Peñarol kind of embraced their gringo moniker, whereas Nacional became much of the locals and became very much more of the elite. Peñarol has the nickname of the Coleman and the Sunflowers. Nacional's nicknames are largely color of their jersey based, but they're also known as the bolsos, which means pocket, because their all jerseys should have a pocket. What a wild moment in the history of the Derby was in 1933, known as the Derby of the Bag. Derby of the Bag. One of their the physios left their medical bag right by the post, and no one saw it. And like someone shot, Nacional player shot, and it was going in, but the bag blocked it from going in. So they commemorate that now. 1949 El Clásico de la Fuga, Derby of the Escape, another big one. In 1990, a red card sparked a brawl that resulted in 20 players being sent off. In 2000, there was a brawl that resulted in 9 players spending a month in jail. Peñarol is in the 1940s. They had a really epic team known as La Máquina, the Machine, and they went on to beat Liverpool 5-0, River Plate 3-0. Some famous Nacional players: Luis Suarez, Diego Godin, Recoba of Inter. Famous Peñarol players: Pablo Forlan, Diego Forlan's dad, and Diego Forlan actually did a real short stint there, but they claim him as one of their famous alumni as well. In 2014, 4 players were sent off, and a post-match brawl saw 9 spend the night in prison. 7 were banned by the FA, and that was a friendly. So oldest derby outside of England, Nacional versus Peñarol. Number 7, this one's really getting exotic. So this is East Bengal versus Mohan Bagan in India, and spans now into a modern day Bangladesh. Mohan Bagan is India's oldest soccer club, football club, and they very much view themselves as true Indian club, whereas East Bengal is kind of become known with Bangladesh. It used to be part of India, then it was annexed and part of Pakistan, and then even more recently, it became part of Bangladesh. And so that has fueled a lot of the rivalries, because like, we're an Indian club, you're Bangladesh, even though historically in origin they both were Indian. And just set the backdrop of this derby is just a really intense, hot, lot of poverty in the region. Winston Churchill was famously quoted saying that you better brush your teeth with cola in that region, and a lot of but it's actually come out of that and viewed as a really vibrant, really interesting, beautiful, highly evolved and cultural cities with universities and schools and theaters, and very much to regional pride. And both sets of supporters are mostly Hindu, but East Bengal has become a little bit more. They maybe have some more Muslim fans as the years are progressing, which certainly adds to the derby. In 1975, East Bengal defeated Mohan Bagan 5-0. One fan was in such a state of ecstasy that after the 4th goal, he had a heart attack. Another tragedy bizarrely befell 25-year-old Mohan Bagan fan, who was so dejected after the defeat, he actually committed suicide, leaving the note: "I wish to take revenge for this defeat in my next birth, returning as a better Mohan Bagan footballer." In 1977, in another defeat, one Mohan Bagan fan poisoned himself, devouring a bottle of pesticide. And then in 1980, when a stampede killed 16 lives and injured hundreds. So again, we're not celebrating any of this, but pretty wild stuff from a derby you probably never even heard of. So, okay, number 8. So this one is about as challenging of a topic as I've ever dug deep into. It's FK Velez versus HSK Zrinjski. So again, the pronunciation, bear with me, it's Zrinjski. And this is set against the unbelievably complicated Dalmatian coast and Balkan region of modern day Bosnia, Herzegovina, Croatia, Serbia, the former Yugoslavia. Russia is involved. This derby, anything that you could be polarized for, this is it. And it's set in the city of Mostar in modern day Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the river quite literally divides Croatians, Serbians, and Bosniaks. And this one is, I mean, this is like almost like something out of Indiana Jones or something, this derby. So Velez is now very much affiliated with the Muslim population in Bosnia, very working class, multi-ethnic, and Zrinjski is that of the West, which is very much that of Croat nationalism. In fact, their logo and their badge has the Croatian flag on it, and it's associated with Croat nationalism, fascism, Catholicism. It was birthed out of the World War I assassination of Franz Ferdinand. Going back to Velez, it is that of socialism, communism, associated very much with the former Yugoslavia. And the club badge is a red and yellow star, very much unabashedly paying homage to the Soviet Union and Russia. So really setting the stage for some really intense stuff.
You almost need a degree in, political science and geography to like really put this one all together.
Yeah, I mean,
there's so many little different dancing pieces that go into the rivalry.
Yeah, it's religion, it's politics, it's race, it's so like Zrinjski has kind of ebbed and flowed with fascist dictators. Velez is very much ebbed and flowed with that of the Communist Party. So, in the former Yugoslavia's time, Velez really thrived, and Zrinjski was obliterated into nothingness. And then the opposite of that is when there was dictators into certain periods, Zrinjski really thrived. So, speaking of dictators and rulers have quite literally put an end to both clubs at different points in times, having their club disintegrated, their archives burned, things like that. In 1929, the dictatorship abolished Velez after an assassination attempt on a successful assassination for the dictator. Velez reemerged, again, in the formation of Yugoslavia in 1945 after World War II, Velez really rose to prominence. And actually, longtime member Mesut Kırmızı had to hide the club's archives and trophies. A secret location was lost upon his arrest and subsequent death in Sarajevo. Many associated with the club ended up in concentration camps and were killed in the war, in World War II. And so, again, like Velez, even to this very day, you'll see they will hang signs of Che Guevara and, other communist figures. Velez to this day has a multi-ethnic, multi-religious fan base reflecting the city's diversity. but Dzerzhinsky is that of predominantly Croat. And, they kind of are identified with the separatist movement, wave of nationalism, a constant desire for Croatians to step out of the shadows, and have a kind of a culture unto themselves. And it's a really wild, there's Dzerzhinsky ultras, known as the Red Army. So also adding a lot of fuel to this derby is that in the most recent horrible civil war in that region not long ago, in many of our lifetimes, Velez was forced to leave their stadium and quite literally fork it over to Dzerzhinsky because it was by the Bosnian Herzegovinian government, because it was in the Croatian region. And that's a wound that just won't ever quite fully heal. I mean, imagine Barcelona having to give their stadium to Real Madrid. That would never end well.
I feel like in most rivalries that we've talked about previously, usually state and sport are separated. And this one, it is so intertwined. You almost can't tell the story of the rivalry without bringing up all of the political associations and events that happened in the past. Yeah, I can't really see forking over. Hey, Manchester United, here's the Etihad, or fill in the blank.
Yeah, and I mean, even in the past decade, not a few years don't go by without one sets of fans stampeding the field at trying to attack the players. This is probably one of the most heated rivalries in the world. This one it has dimensions of geopolitical history, ideology, profiteering, circumstances of war. And in fact, to this very day, away fans are allowed at games, but they have to get on a bus driven by police to even go to the game because it's so intense and violent. Jumping to number 9, America versus Deportivo Cali, drugs, death, and salsa. This is in Colombia. And Cali was started by the upper middle class, and America is very much working class. Again, you've got the class warfare. It's a region of the Cauca Valley that was known for sugarcane plantations. So you really had, you kind of have set this backdrop of you had the Cali plantation owners and America plantation workers. Fast forward to today, you throw in a lot of Colombian drug cartels involved too. It gets really, really intense. This region is known for, constant risk of kidnapping, serious crime. This region is also known as, they like to boast that they're the hardest partying people in all of Colombia, which is saying a lot. That's kind of where the salsa parts comes from. It's set in the heart of a guerrilla-controlled countryside, home of the Norte del Valle cartel, the biggest drug trafficking organization in the world, whose leader Diego Montoya is currently on the FBI's most wanted list. Last year saw the murder of one of the FRV's leaders. The FRV is known as the ultra gangs that represent these clubs. Dozens died in a stampede in 1982. Cali's derby is inextricably linked to drugs and death and the fiery Latin passion. It's in the southwest part of the country. It's the third biggest city in all of Colombia, and it's in the middle of two huge mountain ranges, the Cordillera Occidental and Cordillera Central. It's hot. There's sugar cane plantations. The ultras group, the FRV that I mentioned, is broken down into 7 legions around Cali each, with each having a leader reporting up into a larger leader. They really like to claim that they're students of British hooliganism. They like to really proudly, say that they're just like them, and they study those tactics even. On November 17th in 1982, the rivalry came to a horrific conclusion after America and Cali drew 3-3. Reports of drunken thugs urinating on enemy fans led to a massive stampede, killing 24 people. 163 were injured. And another incident in the 80s similarly killed 47 fans. I mean, this is just mind-boggling stuff. It's just stuff out in the world you've never even heard about. So some of the drug connections to the Derby: Gilberto Rodriguez, Orihuela, known as the chess player, head of the Cali cartel, Colombia's most violent drug gang. He, at one point in time, controlled 80% of the cocaine exports to the United States, earning $20 million a day. It was discovered that Orihuela bankrolled America, partly because he loved the game, but also partly because he wanted to stick it to his rival of the Medellin cartel that has some affiliation with Atlético Nacional. He was arrested at one point in time, and Deportiva America was placed on Executive Order 12798, otherwise known as the Clinton list, and he's still on it to this very day, which seized all of the club's assets. Accusations of payoffs, bribery, money laundering, corruption have tarnished the club's image. And 12 years on, America is still on the Clinton list. So this is another really, really cool one. I say cool. I mean, they're interesting, to watch, and, very much steeped in history. So that was that one. So we're getting towards the end here. Number 10, back in merry old England, the Black Country Derby of West Brom Albion versus Wolverhampton. This rivalry goes back over 140 years. There's many bigger, but this might be one of the oldest, most historic. Some have viewed as the most intense. I mean, it's in the West Midlands region of England. It's called the Black Country Derby because it's in the land of coal that fueled the Industrial Revolution. The Wolverhampton Club was originated by a company that made locks. West Brom was formed out of a company that was a spring factory. During the Industrial Revolution, the West Midlands near Birmingham made iron, steel, glass making, and there was lots of pollution in the region. And in 2008, a survey of English football supporters reported that the Black Country Derby is the most intense rivalry in the country. So much so that starting in 1996, they capped the latest the game can start is 3 p.m. because if any later, the fans are way too drunk. So they've had to, and even as recent as 2011-2012 season, there was a blowout and a riot. West Brom won 5-1, and about 400 to 500 Wolves fans left the game early outside the stadium, and there was a massive riot, forcing major injuries and death, and £20,000 worth of damages were reported. So that's the first installment, guys, of 101 most dangerous derbies, fiercest derbies, deadliest, dastardly, whatever you want to call it. But hopefully you learned something new, and stay with us as we continue to do 10 new every month. And hopefully you learned some new ones and enjoyed it. Thanks, everyone.